Hey guys, this is Rob, and this is Thaco Thoughts with Rob, and this is episode 10. So a couple of weeks ago, Vince, the evil dungeon master, put out a video asking people what was their worst DMing experience. And I decided for the 10th episode, I will go ahead and tell a couple of my own stories. So the first story is actually a third edition. The setup was pretty simple. There was a boy in a city that was kidnapped by slavers. After some investigation, the players discovered that this boy was going to be sold in a slave auction in the Underdark. And they needed to make their way to this Underdark auction in order to either buy the boy back or somehow rescue it. Now, to get to the Underdark slave auction, there was like a castle on top of on the surface, and they would go in and then they would find the entrance down, and that's what would happen. The whole entire setup was simply to get them to be able to meet some of the big bads in the story without necessarily having a combat situation with. So they were traveling across the land towards this castle, and they end up running across a goblin patrol. Now this goblin patrol was simply there as a security screen. They weren't going to fight the players. They were more like if there was like an army of paladins about to descend on the place, they would alert their masters and their chieftain who was actually at the castle. Now this goblin tribe wasn't necessarily totally evil, so when they intercepted the players, the only thing they wanted was an exchange of goods. It wasn't money, it wasn't anything else. They stopped the players and they're like, well, you know what, we'll let you go. Well, you just have to give us a useful tool. Because remember, goblins don't really build things on their own. So they came up with this idea, which was probably pretty smart, that instead of asking for gold and jewels or whatever, or just killing people, they would force anybody that they ran across to give them something useful for the tribe. And then they would just let them. So the encounter was actually pretty good. It's like they had this really cool kind of interaction with the goblins. They gave the goblins some tools, like I think a hammer or something like that. And the goblins were like, all right, see you around. And they started walking off. Well, all of a sudden it was like as if the player said, wait a minute, these guys are goblins. We should be killing them, not dealing with them. So they attacked this goblin patrol. Now, of course, I didn't make a big deal about this. It's like, well, they're goblins. Of course, they're going to try to kill. But I was a little disappointed that they kind of, in some ways, ruined a really cool encounter. But that wasn't here nor there. So they attack the goblins, and they pretty much slaughter them, except for 2 goblins. Okay, and 2 of them basically ran away. One goblin went straight towards his tribe or his village. The other goblin started running towards the castle where the Underdark entrance was. And I really emphasized this, that the goblin was on his way to the Underdark and would probably alert his masters. Instead, they decided to follow the goblin that they believe was going towards his village. So I said, okay, no problem. So they follow the goblin to the village. And they find a cave, and in the cave is basically just young goblins and some. Well, of course, they proceeded to slaughter all the females and goblins, and I'm like, okay, whatever. But once more, I'm emphasizing time here. I said, look, guys, there's that other goblin. He's on his way, and they're like, and they just shrug their shoulders and they keep on like looting the place. Okay, so after they kill all the goblins, they started digging, and then they started digging through the goblin junk. Okay. Now, I've already emphasized that these goblins were just basically taking useful tools from passerbys. There was no real treasure, but they insisted that I give them this very detailed inventory list of everything in this goblin. And once more, I said, well, there's junk. There's hammers, tools, some rusty weapons. And I kept on emphasizing the goblins didn't really have anything really valuable. But they kept on insisting. It's like, there must be something here in this cave. There must be something. They would not let it go. And once more, I kept on emphasizing that there's a goblin heading towards the Underdark, heading towards that castle. They would not listen to me. Instead, they kept on arguing about something having to be in this cave. And finally, I relented. I said, okay, guys, give me some time to think about it, and I will tell you what you find later on. They would not accept that as an answer. And so the game broke down into an argument because these players were trying to literally bully me into giving them some sort of big treasure. They could not accept the fact that they followed a goblin to his village and there not being really anything of value there. And even when I said, okay, well, let me give me some time to think about it and I'll figure out what to give you, they would not accept this answer. And it turns out that they thought that they would find something really valuable in this village and that they would take it to the Underdark and they would use that to trade for the boy. But like I said, it was, I had already established with them that these goblins were pretty chill for goblins, and all they had was junk that they had collected from passerbys. Once more, they would not accept my answer. Once more, I kept on reminding them of the time crunch, and they just did not care. Now, some people out there might have been like, well, you should have just given them what they want, right? But I have this thing about being like bullied and forced to do something. And to me, this was them trying to bully me, okay? And I wasn't going to accept it. They would not accept no for an answer, and I wasn't going to give them anything else but no. And I could not understand why they were so fixated on this goblin cave. So the argument just basically kept on going for good 15 minutes or so. Finally, they decided, okay, we're going to go to the castle. We're going to go to the Underdark. Well, at this point, they had been arguing with me for so long and trying to beat me into submission verbally to give them something out of this cave that at this point, I really just didn't care any. It wasn't like I was trying to kill them. I just went extremely cold. And I decided that I'm just going to let allow the dice to roll as they may, and whatever they decide is what's going to happen, and whatever the dice say, that's what's going to happen. I just became cold. So remember, at this point, the goblin had tons of time. These guys spent like in game time probably at least an hour or more at this village, wasting time. So that goblin had tons of time to get to the Underdark and tell his chieftain and all the other big bosses what was going on. Well, of course, there were several powerful entities at this Underdark. One of them happened to be a beholder who basically cast scry and was and they were all watching the adventurers killing off the females and the young of this goblin village. And guess who else was watching? The chieftain. So the chieftain got a front row seat of his entire tribe being slaughtered. So of course, and they had time to set up a trap. So when the players arrive at the castle, I do the most logical thing that I think that these villains would do. And remember, one of them being Beholder, who was extremely intelligent. They set up a situation where when the players were looking into the courtyard of the castle, they saw a cage dangling over a fire, heating the cage up. And inside that cage were several of the slaves being cooked alive in the middle of the court. So the players decided they're going to rush into the courtyard to save these people. Well, guess what? It was a trap. That was bait. So when they ran into the courtyard, all of a sudden there was this illusion basically disappeared. Now the people in the cage was real, but there was illusion that was hiding everybody. They were up all on the walls, surrounding the players, surrounding the characters. It was very reminiscent of that moment in Return of the Jedi when Leia rescued Han, and all of a sudden the curtain lifts and there's Jabba the Hutt and all minions. That was there. And one of them was Beholder. The other was like a 5th level Goblin Chieftain and a whole bunch of other. The players knew they were surrounded. They were trapped and they surrendered. So now remember, I don't even care anymore at this point. Okay. These guys had argued with me so hard over something so dumb that I was just kind of done with them, but I was going to play it through. And if they played it smart, great. If they played it dumb, great. If the dice was against them, great. I just didn't care. The Goblin Chieftain came down, and they were disarmed, unarmed, and he he gave each one of the players a short sword. Now at this point, the players were like maybe third level at the most, and he was like a fifth level. He was like a fifth level fighter. And then he challenged each player or each character to a duel to the death. And he just went down the line and just killed one player after another, one character after another. And of course, everybody was upset with me and, blaming me and all this other stuff. And you know what? At that point, I just didn't care. As far as I was concerned, the game was over with. Some of you might, of course, because I've had people come down on me acting as if, this was like my fault, that I should have just given the players what they wanted. But I just don't play like that, okay? And I even tried to meet him halfway in the middle. I try to say, you know what? I am going to think of something, and I'll tell you guys later what you get. I just need some time to think about it, because I didn't want to. Because one of the things I don't like doing is giving out stuff just like willy-nilly and then regretting it later. I want to think about it, like what would be appropriate for this situation. But they wanted the stuff right then, right there, and I just wasn't willing to do that, and they didn't like that. So anyway, you can judge me, call me a bad dungeon master or whatever, but if you were in my situation, I think that most people would have been very upset, and you would have felt cornered, and that's how I felt. And so basically, I just folded the game right there because I wasn't going to deal with it. Now, strangely enough, my second story, it's with the same players, and this time it was a game of Exalted. I don't know if anybody knows or is familiar with Exalted, but it's very anime style, right? You play almost godlike character. So everybody was like pretty powerful, okay, doing all kinds of crazy stuff. But the thing about it is you were playing, they weren't playing like out and out like superhero types, but they were playing more heroic type characters. What happened kind of really caught me off guard. So they were playing in this large city called Nexus. This is in the Exalted lore, but Nexus is this huge type mega city. But there's a sub city underneath it where there's a lot of like poor tribal people kind of living underneath. Basically almost like sewer dwellers, but there's almost kind of a whole entire realm underneath the city of Nexus where all kinds of people live and tribes and monsters. So they went down there, and I can't remember why initially they went down there. This was a long time ago. But they ran across a village, and they had, once more, they had a nice encounter with the villagers. Everything seemed to be great and wonderful. And then they moved on. They did some trading, bought some stuff. So as they were going along, I decided that I wanted to have a combat encounter. And something that was going to be just something to liven up the game. That's all it was supposed to be. So as they were going along, they were passing this up, and out of this pit arises a demon, like it's a rat demon made of a swarm of rats. Now, this demon was not as powerful as the players, okay, as the characters. The characters were almost like demigod, and this rat demon was just supposed to be something that they could easily fight, and to allow them to use their powers in a cool way. And to make sure that they would fight the demon, I decided that the demon was going to ask the most abhorrent thing possible. Like, no one would ever agree to this deal. And so the demon says, you know what? I will allow you to pass unmolested, but you have to go and bring me like 20 babies, like 25 babies to eat, right? To sacrifice to me. And I'm thinking, okay, well, there's no way they're going to say yes to that. They'll immediately attack the rat demon, and they would have easily beat this thing. But instead, they agreed to this. And I was like kind of taken aback. I was like, huh? And so, but I was kind of in denial, and I let it play out. So they go back to the village that they just had this very nice encounter with, and they stole from this village 25 of their children, 25 babies. And they bring the babies back to the rat demon. And then they watch the rat demon devour the babies. And I was being very graphic here, okay? and I was in a state of kind of shock, and they were just going along with it like it was no big deal. And then I kept on thinking, well, sooner or later they're going to have to figure out that what they did was how horrible it is, and there's going to be a reaction. But there was no reaction. They just treated it like it was just a casual business deal, watching 25 babies be devoured by a rat demon. And I had to stop the game at this point. Now you have to understand, I am not like I'm not a prude. I have run some pretty graphic games. I've run Vampire the Masquerade, which can be pretty graphic. So I'm not afraid of the so-called hardcore R material, but in this situation, I was very much caught off guard by their disregard for literally babies. And unfortunately, I was so kind of disgusted, and I started questioning their motivations. Because I said, guys, this demon was easy. Why did you make this type of deal with a demon that you could have easily defeated? Their attitude was, if you know anything about Exalted, like reincarnation is a major thing in that game system, and they didn't think anything about it simply because they said, oh well, the babies would be reincarnated anyway, so it doesn't matter. And I'm just like, what? I said, people in this world believe in reincarnation. Does that give them an excuse to just murder people and just say, well, they'll just be reincarnated? And their answer and their blasé attitude, it really actually upset me. I guess the reason it upset me is because I'm somebody who I want to root for the characters. I want to root for the players and the characters. But what they did was so disgusting and so horrific that all I wanted to do was kill their characters. I did not want to run a game for characters that would do something so disgusting and disturbed. It's like watching a movie about characters you absolutely hate, and the movie expects you to root for them for some reason. And so I was kind of caught in that dilemma, and I was just like, we got into a big moral debate and all that kind of stuff. And once again, you can say, well, I should have been impartial. I should have been above it all. I should have just rolled with it. But this was actually kind of a long time ago, and I guess I was not as detached as I should have, because I pretty much folded the game then and there, because like I said, their arguments were ridiculous, their rationales were ridiculous. It didn't make any sense to me why they would agree to any of this. That is just 2 of my mini RPG horror stories. And like I said, I've been running games and playing games for basically 30 years. So I have a nice little collection of horror stories of this nature. It's just that these 2 are the most prominent because of the just kind of weirdness of both of them. And it happened to be from the same group of players. But anyway, I hope you maybe not enjoyed those stories, because they were kind of hard to enjoy at the time. But after a certain amount of time, I'm looking back on them with more humor than anger. But there was a time where I just thinking about these situations really angered me. But I've been over it for years. To me, they're just interesting stories that you can tell around the campfire, so to speak. So anyway, I will leave you off with that, and next episode will be more traditional, and we'll get into some real 2nd edition goodness. And as usual, this video is brought to you by the Evil Dungeon Master events, and you can find this video on, of course, here YouTube and Spotify. And with that, I will bid you adieu.